I wrong for telling my niece the family secret? I, 35 female, had two older sisters growing up, Jane and Kim. Kim got sick and died, but not before giving birth to my niece, Laura, 18 female. It had been a year after Kim's passing when Jane and Laura's dad, Tom, 42 male, confessed to dating and were now engaged. Bro, I don't understand. I never understand sisters going after the same guy. Especially after they have a baby together. That's so weird. That's so nasty. I accused them of cheating. Jane and Tom explained that this wasn't something they had planned, but there was no cheating and knew that Kim would want them to be happy. Yeah, but not with each other. You can be happy with someone else. Convenient since she's, dead. I did not attend the wedding and was super upset at how everyone else was so accepting of the relationship. But the thing that hurt me the most was how Jane and Tom intended to completely erase Kim and Laura's life. She was barely 2 when Kim died, and they decided it would be better if Laura thought Jane was her mother in every sense of the word after the adoption was finalized. Tom got rid of any items that would suggest he and Kim were ever in a relationship and made his family swear to never tell Laura the truth. Jane expected everyone on our side of the family to do the same, but I refused, and as such, I was denied access to Laura. It hurt, but when I thought about all those times Kim cried, knowing that she wouldn't live long enough to see Laura grow up, there was just no way I could honor the lie. They even had Laura's name illegally changed to something that Jane liked, as Kim picked out Laura's first name. I distanced myself from my family over time over this, but my parents always tried to get us to reconcile, citing that they didn't like this arrangement either, but accepting it was better than not being a part of Laura's life at all. I just couldn't do it. Growing up, Laura had known of me, but we never really interacted. Apparently, she's interested in studying a field that I work in and reached out to me through social media. The last time I saw her, she was 7, and I started to tear up about how much she looked like him. We would talk from time to time, and eventually Laura asked why I wasn't around. I tried to keep it vague, but Laura knew that there was more to the story, as I didn't seem like the person I was described to be. If we had been talking through DMs like before, I probably wouldn't have done it, but we were video chatting, and something about looking directly into her eyes broke me, and I confessed to everything. Before Kim died, she and I made a series of videos for Laura to watch at her big moments, and I told her that if she ever wanted to watch any of them, I'd send them. Laura asked me to send some, and then I heard nothing from her for days. Recently, I got a call from an enraged Jane and Tom, berating me for ruining their family. After Laura watched some of the videos, she confronted my parents, who confirmed everything. Laura has moved out and currently not speaking to anyone, and no one knows where she is right now. Everyone is angry at me. So, am I the asshole? Let me clarify some things. My parents talked about Kim and had pictures of her in the house, so Laura knew who she was. She just didn't know that Kim gave birth to her.
Story time about how my boyfriend caught me with my sugar daddy. Quick disclaimer, this is not my story time and my eyes are red because I got sunscreen in them. So my boyfriend and I have been together for almost 4 years. Relationship itself is good, but the only problem is that he doesn't really pay for anything. I pay for the bills, almost all of the rent, and I even pay when we go on dates. I've always had a good job and he's always had like mediocre jobs here and there. I've always told him that I want him to get a better job and he says no because he's comfortable at the job that he's at. Meanwhile, I'm busting my butt and paying for everything. The only things that he pays for are when he goes out to eat by himself or if he's hanging out with his friends, or sometimes here and there he'll buy groceries, but it's really rare. So 2 years ago, I decided to find myself a sugar daddy. Number 1, I want the money, and number 2, I just want to feel taken care of. So I went through a few sugar daddies, and I didn't tell my boyfriend that I was actually doing this. Finally, I found myself the perfect sugar daddy. He gives me $5,000 a month and takes me out shopping whenever I want. We usually go out to fancy dinners, movies, things like that. Whenever I'm with my sugar daddy, I tell my boyfriend that I'm hanging out with friends. I was out with my sugar daddy one night and my boyfriend walks into the restaurant. Part 2 is up. I'm having dinner with my sugar daddy when my boyfriend walks into the restaurant. By the way, my sugar daddy did not know I had a boyfriend. As soon as I see my boyfriend walk in, I tell my sugar daddy that I have to go to the bathroom. I literally bolted to the bathroom. As I'm in the bathroom stall freaking out, my boyfriend calls me. So I answer the phone and he says, "Hey, are you at the restaurant? I swear to God, I just saw you run into the bathroom. Who's that guy with you at the table?" I was caught. I had no option but to be honest with my boyfriend. I tell him to come to the bathroom and he comes in and I explain to him that it is my sugar daddy. Then he stares at me for a few seconds and asks me, "How much money does he give you?" I decided to lie and I said 3,000 instead of the 5,000. And my boyfriend says, "Wow." And I'm like, "Aren't you mad?" And he said, "No, you're just gonna have to share now." Excuse me? Then I told him I didn't want to be in the relationship any longer because he's a man-child and I had to pay for everything. Begged me not to leave him and he said that he would get a better job. We're still in the bathroom at this point and my sugar daddy's waiting for me outside. Then my boyfriend says, "If you don't want me to go out there and tell him that you have a boyfriend, you better start giving me some of that money." I was shocked. Part 3 is up. My boyfriend threatened me and told me that if I didn't share the money, he would tell my sugar daddy that I had a boyfriend. I believed him. I went back to my sugar daddy's table and we basically had dinner with my boyfriend sitting across from us having dinner with his friends. The whole time I was trying to figure out how I would break up with my boyfriend without having to share the money that my sugar daddy gave me. I told my sugar daddy that I wasn't feeling well. He called me an Uber to take me back to my apartment. I got to my apartment and I started packing my stuff. Like, I knew my boyfriend was bad for making me pay for everything, but I didn't know he was that bad. Freaking threatened me. Then he starts calling my phone, sends a text message, and it says I'm gonna be home in 5 minutes. So I gathered all my things, ran downstairs, and waited behind the building for the Uber. And my boyfriend sees me, comes up to me and rips my bag away from me. Tried to get my phone, but I took it away from him. And he said that I had to share the money that my sugar daddy gave me. Finally, the Uber arrives and I jump in. My boyfriend actually pulled me by my hair to try to get me out of the car. I've blocked him and haven't spoken to him since, and I'm still with my sugar daddy.
Am I the asshole for getting upset with my husband after he told me nothing will change while I'm pregnant? So me, 26 female, and my husband, 28 male, who I'll call Jake for this story, have been together for 5 years and married for 3. We have recently started trying for a baby as we both felt like that was the next step in our life together. And 3 weeks ago, I got a positive test back. We were really happy and told our families, and now my mom and mother-in-law want to throw a big baby shower for us. It was just super good news all around. Well, 2 nights ago, me and Jake were getting ready for bed when he reminds me to go through the house and make sure all the lights are off. Now, he can be a little lazy at times, and it has become a nightly routine for me to make sure all the lights are off that he leaves on before we go to bed. I wasn't feeling very well and asked if he could just do it since he wasn't doing anything, and he was literally standing by the door. He then tells me, "No, this is what is expected of you every night." I was just a little hurt, but I didn't want to fight with him, so I just did it. When I came back, Jake goes on this very long and unprovoked rant saying things like, just because you are pregnant does not mean anything will change, and you are still expected to cook, clean, and do all the chores every day because how can you be expected to be a mother if you can't handle a little work? He wasn't yelling or anything, he was just talking to me quietly as if I was 2 inches tall. I was shocked because I had never heard him say anything like this. This rant went on for about 30 minutes before I interjected and asked, "Well, what do you plan on doing to help me with all of this?" He then got extremely defensive, saying he works his ass off at his job to provide for me and what is going to be our future children. For context, I don't work at the moment. My job was not paying enough to justify me going in, so I am a full-time college student. He ended up saying that it doesn't matter how I feel physically or mentally, it's a mother's job to push through, and if he helped and babied me, I wouldn't be a good mother. I got extremely upset and started yelling, and I said that I wish I would have known this is how you felt before I got pregnant with your baby. There was a moment of silence before he started crying, and he left for the night to stay at his mother's house. What a bitch. He hasn't been back yet, and my mother-in-law and sister-in-law have called me berating me and saying I broke Jake's heart with what I said and I need to apologize immediately, and until I do, he isn't coming home. I don't know how to feel. So, am I the asshole for yelling at my husband after he said he isn't helping me with anything during the pregnancy because it's a mother's job to deal with it? Like, oh, this is making me mad. This is making me mad. Ew, I've never gotten this upset over a story. That's so fucking, like, that behavior is just disgusting.
Story time about how I got caught hooking up with my stepson. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. My husband actually cheated on his wife with me. I started working at his company when I was 18. We started an affair and I knew it was wrong, but at the time I was very broke. He offered me a wealthy lifestyle and believe it or not, we fell in love. So when he and I got married, I was still 18. He was much older than me, he was 42. Everyone in town, of course, started hating me because I broke up the family. His wife couldn't even see my face. My husband already had 2 kids when we got married. One was 12, one was 15. So they were much closer in age to me than he was. The kids and I got along super well. I was their cool stepmom and we had a lot of fun. When I turned 20, the oldest boy came to live with us. And I think you already know what happens. My husband was always traveling for work. That means my stepson and I would be home alone most of the time. One night we decided to watch a movie, and before I knew it, we were making out on the couch. From then, we basically started an affair behind my husband's back. Part 2 is up. Part 2 about how I got caught hooking up with my stepson. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So like I said, my husband was always traveling for work. So my stepson and I would be alone in the house a lot. One night we were watching a movie and it just happened. After that, we couldn't get enough of each other. He even started skipping class so that he could spend more time with me. We basically turned into boyfriend and girlfriend when my husband wasn't there. When my husband would come home from his work trips, we would pretend like everything was normal. One day after my husband got back from one of his work trips, he found one of his son's socks in our bed. He asked me how it got there, but I told him it probably got stuck in there while I was washing the sheets. A few months passed by and my stepson and I are still hooking up. This is when I realized that I hadn't gotten my period in a few months. My period was always irregular, so I didn't think anything of it. My stepson went to the pharmacy to get me a pregnancy test. It came out positive. But the big problem is that my husband can't have children anymore. How was I going to explain this to my husband when he couldn't have kids? Part 3 is up. Part 3 about how I got caught hooking up with my stepson. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. My stepson and I take the pregnancy test and it turns out it was positive. Well, I told my stepson that his dad wasn't able to have kids anymore. That's when he really flipped out. Then he tells me we should just tell his dad the truth. I told him let's not do anything until we actually confirm that I'm pregnant. We go to the doctor the next day, and it turns out I'm not pregnant. But this made me realize that we needed to end the affair. Once we got home, I told him we needed to break things off. He begged me not to, and we went to his bedroom. Not even 2 minutes later, his mother walks in. She catches us on his bed. She nearly has a heart attack, calls his dad, and tells him everything. She took him out of the house and told me never to see him again. When my husband came back from his trip, he made me promise not to see my stepson again. I told him we should get a divorce, but he said no. Then he confessed to me that he's been having an affair too. Now he doesn't even let me leave the house anymore. I want a divorce. What should I do?
My mind is always on rewind. I've lost my sense of time. Where's my frame to hide? Here by this night, the stars all over the sky. It lights my beauty inside. Oh, what a beautiful light here. This time I know where I have to pull myself fitting down this road. I'm a diamond made necklace, cause it's me that I chose. And I'm nobody else's but mine. You're mine, no.
Storytime on how my best friend faked her death. By the way, we're gonna call her Amanda, and we were both 16 at the time. Going through high school, Amanda got bullied a lot. She didn't necessarily know how to defend herself, so I would always find myself defending her all the time. And I had no problem doing it because that was my closest friend. We were like sisters and we grew up together. And people bullied her about her nose being too big and her acne, just really mean stuff. There was this one time the mean girls at her school literally threw pizza at her face to tell her that that's what her face looks like. And I would always try to help her with her confidence. But I noticed me being around her all the time, I started to get bullied. And people would always attack me about hanging out with her. But don't worry, I'd always handle myself. But it got to a point where it was just overly done. So one day, I just wanted to see a test of what would happen if I didn't talk to her for the day or hang out with her. And the next day, she disappeared. Come back for part 2. Part 2 on how my best friend faked her death. So like I said, I started to get bullied for hanging around her. So I wanted to try and see what would happen if I decided not to really hang out with her for a day. And the next day, she disappeared. So the day she wasn't at school, I went back home and called her. Her mom picked up and I asked her if she was there. Her mom said, no, I thought that she was with you. So that night, Amanda never came home. So the next day, her mom had told me that she was going to go to the police station and file a missing persons report. But she was told she couldn't really file one because the person had to be missing for at least 72 hours to be considered missing. And I felt so scared because she's never missing. She never ups and leaves. And I started to believe it was because the day I stopped talking to her. And I was blaming myself for her being gone. And I was hoping that she wasn't kidnapped. But come back for part 3 if you want to know what happened. Part 3 on how my best friend faked her own death. So Amanda was missing for a week. Her mom had came to the school to let them know that if they ever saw her come by to please let her know. Or to please call the police. And during this whole time, a lot of people were coming up to me asking me what happened to her. And of course, I had to tell them that I didn't know because I didn't. But all I could hope is that she was safe and alive. There was a few students that laughed about her being missing, but there was a few students that cared. So I was asking people to put up posters. Around this time, social media wasn't really out, so we couldn't necessarily post anything online. Everything went on polls. Amanda was also in the news. And every day I cried hoping that she would come back. After 2 weeks of her being gone, I get a letter from Amanda. And I'm so shocked because I'm like, oh my gosh, where is she? And it was a suicide letter. Part 4 on how my best friend faked her own death. So I got a letter in the mail and it was from Amanda. I was so shocked about the letter, I opened it up really quickly. When I read it, I found out that it was a suicide letter. And I just sat there and cried. I had went to her house and knocked on the door to let her mom know, but her mom also received the same letter. After a couple days, her mom did have the police do another search and no one could find her. I was hoping maybe she didn't commit suicide in a place that we could never find her. I don't know, but it just didn't feel right and how she just left off this way. Her mom just couldn't believe it. So a couple months I would stay inside her mom's house. I'd sleep inside of her room, just grieving her being lost. But I couldn't believe that she committed suicide. I didn't believe that she was dead, and neither did her mom. Deep down, I knew that she was somewhere out there. Come back for part 5 on how my best friend faked her death. So, after 2 years of Amanda being missing, even though she wrote those letters to us, we both still didn't believe that she was gone. And I thought about her just about every day. During these years, her mom would constantly do searches. Maybe if she wasn't alive, then maybe they could find her body. Then she would find the truth. Her mom couldn't accept the fact that maybe she was dead. And every week on Sunday, she'd go out there even by herself. My mom and a few of her friends would always tell her she can't keep doing that. She'll even sometimes go out in the middle of the night, walk around calling for her. And her mom started to get really sick. After the 3rd year of her being gone, her dad finally came inside the picture. Amanda was never really close with her dad. He wasn't really a part of her life. He started to see how mentally ill her mother was becoming, so he decided to set up a funeral so this all could end. But her mom didn't want to attend. Come back for part 6 on how my best friend faked her death. So her dad wanted to set up the funeral so they could finally end this grieving. Her mom didn't want to attend because she didn't believe that she was dead, and I still couldn't believe it either. Her dad read the note, and he wanted them both to stop all this pain. After a couple months battling out of doing a funeral, he finally did one. And I started thinking, maybe she is gone, because maybe then I could let go of this whole situation. So, of course, me and my family attended the funeral. Of course, they had no body to bury, but they did set up a grave. And they put her stone in the ground. So, after 11 years of that happening, I believe that she was dead. I had moved to Texas, met my husband, which I married, and I got pregnant. Maybe 4 months into my pregnancy, I wanted to take mommy classes. And when I got there, the instructor looked like Amanda's mom. Part 7 on how my best friend faked her death. I got pregnant and I wanted to start taking mommy classes. When I had got to the class, the instructor looked like Amanda's mom, but almost like a younger version. When I looked at her face even closer, she had the same mole that Amanda had down the bottom of her chin. And then I snapped. That's Amanda. When I walked up to her and said, Amanda, she looked at me and froze. After she stared at me for 5 seconds, a girl comes up to her and says, Mom. I looked over and gasped. After she talked with her daughter, there was more and more women coming in for the class. And once I realized it was her, I ran back to my car. When I got to my car, I started to have a panic attack because that was her. And the daughter that called for her had to be maybe 12 or 13 years old. And I started to think, in order for Amanda to have a 12-year-old now, she would have to have gotten pregnant months before she went missing. Storytime on how my parents forced me into acting. I played roles that were on TV networks like Disney Channel and Nickelodeon. And I also did PBS Kids and a few other networks. As a child actor, my parents expected a lot from me. The roles that I played would pay the bills at home. When I was younger and I was acting, I didn't know that money came with it. So whenever I did act, if anything that had to do with money, my parents would handle it. And still to this day, I haven't seen that money. But anyways, so during my time of acting, my parents put me in acting classes, singing, and dancing. They really wanted me to be that triple threat. But when it came to these shows that I played in, I would never get the main character. I'd always be casted like an extra that had a few lines. When I finally got my big break, I was casted in the Hannah Montana show. But you will not believe what my parents had to do for me to get that role. Part 2 on how my parents forced me into acting. So finally, I got a major role in a Hannah Montana show. For my role, I necessarily didn't audition. My parents built up a contract and forced my signature. In order for me to play the role, there were certain things that I had to do. When it came to getting clothes, I had to make sure I bought my clothes. With the money that I made at my previous acting jobs, I had to make sure my own makeup was done, had to make sure my own hair was done, and I also had to do janitor work, as in like sweep, mop the floors. Maybe a good 2 months before the show had started, I had to get the stage set up and, the scene. 2 months of working and not really getting paid for it. The head of Disney had found out about the contract and forced to sue my parents if they had continued with it. After the whole situation, I never got the role, and I put all that work in for no compensation and no story time on how I catfished my boyfriend to see if he would cheat on me. So around the time I had to be like 15, 16, and my boyfriend, he was probably like 17 because he was about 2 years older than me. Everything in our relationship seemed fine, but he was very secretive. For one, he'd never let me touch his phone. He would always make sure anytime he put his phone down, the screen was faced downward, or he'd put it in his pocket or just hide it. Anytime I asked to use his phone, maybe to call someone, he'd be like, no. I knew that there was something going on that he wasn't telling me, so I created a fake Snapchat account. I found pictures of this really pretty girl on Instagram, and I used all her pictures. And I'd post stories here and there, and then I decided to reach out to him. And he literally responded in like 5 minutes. I said, hey, do you have a girlfriend? And you're not going to believe his response. Come back. Part 2 on how I catfished my boyfriend to see if he would cheat on me. So, like I said, I reached out to him, and he responded immediately. I asked him, hey, do you got a girlfriend? And he responded right now that he's just talking to people. But he didn't clarify inside of any of the messages that he had a girl. Then I started thinking maybe he thinks that our relationship is like still in talking stage. So I didn't get too mad until I asked him if he wanted to go out. Like go out on a date. He asked me where I would like the date. And I told him I like to meet him at a movie theater. And like for a good week, we're sitting there flirting and we're planning out our date. Now, the whole time of us planning out the date, when the day came, I didn't really expect to see him. But when I walked up to the corner of the movie theater, he was standing outside. Come back for part 3 on how I catfished my boyfriend to see if he would cheat on me. So I peeked beside the movie theater and I see him standing outside. I was seriously heartbroken that he was going to meet up with the catfish. And I had him sitting there waiting. I was texting him through Snapchat telling him, oh, I'm a bit late. And I literally had him sitting there for 2 hours. Also, during this whole process of him waiting, also went ahead and got food and came back. After a couple minutes, he was like he was just going to leave. By then, I had popped up at the movie theater and asked him, what are you doing here? And he responded, oh, I just got done seeing a movie. I was like, why didn't you tell me you went to the movie theaters? Maybe I could have came with you. Then he was like, no, I just wanted to go by myself. Then I pulled up my phone, showed him a picture of the girl I was catfishing, and asked him, was this your date? Then he pretended to not know who that was, and then I showed him our messages. When he found out it was me the whole time, he got mad at me and broke. Back when I was in middle school, my sister had got pregnant in high school. And she had got pregnant by a guy which she was dating for around like 8 months. When my sister finally got the guts, she had told our parents. And my mom and dad were extremely furious. My mom had told her that she's not allowing her child to bring any bastard children in the world. And that the only way that she can have her baby is if she gets married. And my parents were really religious. My dad was a preacher. My dad's ultimatum to her was to either get married or have an abortion. He really cared about our image to the church. And he said that she needed to get married. My sister at the time, she really wanted the baby. So she kind of proposed to the guy that she was dating in a way. But he had said no. 2 weeks later, the reason why he said no was because he already had another child and another baby on the way. Come back for part 2 of how my sister proposed to a guy that she was dating. So her boyfriend had said no, and she ended up finding out the reason why he said no was because he already had another child and another baby on the way. But she didn't find out through him. She found out through his mom. She had went to his mom to get her blessing, and she spilled everything. And his mom had no clue that she even existed. The whole time that they were together, he was already with 2 other women. She had first saw his son, who was running around in the house. And the girl that was pregnant at the time was the girl that he was dating for like 2 years. Instead of her receiving his mom's blessing, his mom told my sister to stay away from him because she don't want her ended up like his other baby mamas. Not knowing the reason why she even asked for his blessing was because she was pregnant as well. After everything his mom told her, she told her thank you, and she left. If you guys want to know what happened after that, come back for part 3. Am I wrong for breaking up my best friend's relationship with her boyfriend? Some people may say it was petty, but I think it was justice. So my best friend at the time, which we're going to call Coco, had a boyfriend, and we're going to call him Nick. They met in high school their junior year, and they were together for about like 2 years. Nick was seriously in love with Coco. He would literally do everything for her. Honestly, Nick was like her little puppet. Honestly, throughout the relationship, I felt as though Coco really didn't respect Nick. I mean, the things that he did for her, I wish a man would do for me. And I just really felt like she didn't really appreciate him. If I was in a relationship with Nick, the relationship would have been mutual. I seriously believe that Nick deserved better because Coco wouldn't do anything. She literally added no value to the relationship, but Nick, he would buy her things, took her shopping, went on dates, went on trips, and Coco had nothing to show for it. So I made a plan to steal her man, and in the next part, I'll tell you exactly why I decided to make that choice. Part 2 on why I decided to steal my best friend's man. So, like I said, the relationship between Coco and Nick wasn't mutual. Coco seriously did not deserve him. In the process of their entire relationship, Coco was cheating on Nick. And, you know, as a best friend, I tried to keep it cordial, but I just didn't like how Nick was getting treated, especially with all the things that he was doing for her. And you won't even believe the person that she was cheating on Nick with. My crush. And she knew that was my crush. She tried to hide the fact that she was talking to him, but I ended up finding out through mutual friends. I never confronted Coco about it because I just wanted to see if she would be honest with me, but for weeks she never did. So one day I decided to go to Nick's house, and I practically told him what it was. At first he didn't believe me, but then once he realized me, out of all people, would come to him about the situation, he understood and felt heartbroken. So we created a plan to hurt Coco. Come back for part 3. Part 3 on why I decided to steal my best friend's man. So, like I said, I went to his house and told him that Coco was cheating on him. And all necessary, I really don't know what Coco was doing with my crush, but I heard from other people that she was talking to him. And honestly, that was enough information for me. And we decided to plan a romantic sneaky link and invite her an hour later. In the process of us doing this, I didn't expect anything to happen, but it did. And I don't know if he expected anything to happen that night, but he practically ended up cheating on Coco with me. Later that night, when she finally arrived, Nick told her she actually needed to go home and that he was busy doing something, even though he invited her to come over. He felt something was off, so she ran upstairs to his bedroom, which was where I was. When she saw me, she yanked me by my hair and pulled me out of the bed. And the rest was history. I ended up finding out 2 weeks later after that incident, the only reason why she was talking to my crush was to get him with me. Story time about the girl next door. So around the time I lived in New York with my sister and dad, across the street there was a girl. I never knew her name, but she was really pretty. I had to be 11 and her herself maybe 15, 16. I was always playing outside, and ever so often she came out to take a baby for a stroll. Back then it never really occurred to me that she was a teen mom. Truthfully, I thought that baby was her little sister. And the baby would cry all the time, and she could never get the baby to quiet down. The guy she lived with, which I believe was her dad, would get mad at her when she couldn't quiet the baby down. There was a particular night after 4th of July, the baby was crying, and again she couldn't get the baby to stop crying. At that time, I was outside jumping rope, and I heard a slap and a pound against the door, and the baby stopped crying. I was scared that something happened to the baby, but come back for part 2 so I could tell you guys what happened. Part 2 of the girl that lived next door. So like I said, the baby was crying, and in the middle of the night, I heard a slap and a pound against the door, and the baby stopped crying. I was afraid that something had happened to the baby, so I ran across the street, and I listened to the sounds behind the front door. The guy that lived there had opened the door, and I fell into the house. He yelled at me saying, "What are you doing on my property?" When I got up and I looked up, the baby was on the ground, and the girl had bruises on her face. I told him I was sorry, and I asked what happened to the baby. He yelled at me, telling me to get out, and the girl got up to pick the baby up, and the baby started crying again. I got scared and ran back across the street. And the next day, the man came back and knocked on my door. Come back for part 3. Part 3 of the girl that lived next door. So like I said, the man came back and knocked on my door. My sister had answered, and he asked my dad, but around that time my dad wasn't home, so he just left. From then on, I was kind of afraid of going outside because I was afraid that the man was going to see me, so for a whole week I never came out. When I finally decided to go out, I asked my sister to come with me and play jump rope. While we were outside playing jump rope, our neighbors across the street, second floor, blinds opened, and I looked up because the blinds are never open. As we were looking, the words "help me" were on the window, and which appeared to be written in red lipstick. We got scared and told our dad, and my dad immediately called the police, but after the police visited, they told my dad that there wasn't anyone in there. No baby, no girl, just a man living across the street. He said maybe we were seeing things or reading things wrong. It gets really bad after this. Come back for part 4. Part 4 about the girl that lived across the street. I think maybe a month after the incident, I stopped seeing the girl and I stopped hearing the baby. And I kind of stopped thinking about them for a while. I thought maybe her and her little sister moved with their mom and left the guy who I thought which was their dad. I'd say that next year I finally saw the girl, but this time she was much skinnier. She had came up to me and asked me if I seen her daughter. I said no, and she walked away. I was confused at first because I didn't know that baby was hers. Then years later, it was my prom night. Before I took a step out of my house, I seen out my window that an entire police SWAT team came to arrest my neighbor. Then they went into the house and there were multiple girls. Had to be like 8 of them coming out of his house, and some of the girls looked really weak. Lastly, there was a little girl and she had to be like 6, 7, and I thought it was crazy, like how did all those girls get in there? To this day, I wonder what happened to the girl next door and if she ever found her baby.
Story time on how I found out my dad had a whole nother family through social media. I'm talking wife and kids. Okay, so my mom and dad met when I was 3, but I could always recall him always being there in my life. So technically, he's my stepdad. They got married, and then 2 years later, my sister was born. In another 3 years, my twin brothers, Trey and Tyrese. On my 17th birthday is when everything came out. Around that time, my mom was 4 months pregnant, and I had posted a picture on MySpace of me and my family at my birthday dinner. Also, I forgot to mention, I wasn't even allowed to have social media. I didn't even have a phone, but I had a computer, but my parents didn't know I had a MySpace account. I think maybe a week after the post, I get a comment from a random person under the name of Sunshine. They say, "Hey, that's my dad. Are you his cousin or niece? We should talk." The profile pic was a picture of flowers. When I saw the comment, I was a little weirded out, but come back for part 2 if you really want to know what I did afterwards. Part 3 on how I found out my dad had a whole nother family through social media. So I messaged that fake Sunshine account and asked why did they keep making those comments underneath my post. They messaged back 2 hours later saying you were posting pictures of my dad. I responded back, no, that's my dad. Then they sent me a picture of a girl with my dad. I was like, who's that other girl? They responded, me. I was like, no, you're a fake page. And she responded with another picture, but with my dad and a whole nother woman and 3 kids, including the girl. When I saw that, I shut my computer down, and later that day, I went to my friends to show them. They were so surprised, and I asked them what I should do. Deja was like, don't do anything. If you do, your family is going to fall apart. Alice butts in and just tells Deja to shut up. She was like, yo, you got another sister. Don't you want to know who she is? I replied, no. Alice was like, you should tell your mom. Deja was saying no, and they was just arguing back and forth whether or not if I should say anything. Come back for part 4. Part 2 on how I found out my dad had a whole nother family through social media. So I posted my birthday picture. A week later, I get a comment saying, hey, that's my dad. Are you his cousin or niece? We should talk. Me being the investigator that I am, I went through the page, but they really had no pictures, nothing, just pictures of flowers. So I started thinking maybe they probably meant to put that underneath somebody else's post. 2 months go by and I make another post for Mother's Day. It's a pic of me and my mom and my dad in the corner photobombing. Within 5 minutes of the post, I get another comment from that Sunshine account saying, I think we might be cousins. I was a bit suspicious about the account, so I went to my friends about it. When I showed my friend Deja, she said, ignore it because if you show your parents, they'll probably take your computer away because you have a MySpace account. My other friend Alice said maybe y'all could be related, so you should reach out to the page. Later that night, I was feeling very anxious, so I messaged that account, and you're not even going to believe what they told me. Come back for part 3. I was once working at a fast food restaurant. Working there stopped me from eating from this place ever again. It's everyone's favorite spot to get burgers and fries, and it seems like no matter what people tell you, people still continue to eat because how cheap it is. But let's start with the customers. Always be nice to your servers, because I had a couple of coworkers that would take the burger meat, rub it onto the floor, and serve it to the customers that came off rude. The restaurant had mice, and if they found something, they got to it. There was a particular day where I accidentally left out the burger buns, and the mice, of course, got to them. On my way to toss them into the trash, my manager stops me and says, we're low on stock for the burger buns. We need to keep those. And they were served to multiple families. There's way more dangerous things that went down, but if you guys want me to disclose everyone's favorite restaurant, let me know down below if I should make a part. part 2 of the most disgusting fast food restaurant I've ever worked for. And here's a couple of things I think you should know. The hiring process is super easy. You literally just gotta be 16. Okay, so back to the food. When it came to preparing food, the guys in the back that will prepare the food would never change their gloves. They would go from touching doors, cleaning things, to back to preparing food again. I'm pretty sure most of the food they made was contaminated. Our manager was the worst. She loved the food they had and sometimes would pick up a batch of fries with her bare hands and would just eat as she worked. Half the time when she got done with counting money, she wouldn't wash her hands neither. And y'all know how dirty money is. Now exposing the restaurant. I said if you guys comment down below, I might just tell you guys what fast food restaurant it was. But if this TikTok blows up, I do not want to get sued. Just know they make burger fries and they're the most popular fast food restaurant in the world. There was a girl named Jessica Phillips that went missing in my high school. She went missing in the middle of our junior year. When her parents came out about it, the school put posters up everywhere, alerts on the news. 2 weeks later, they decorated her locker. Ever so often, I see her closest friend weeping during class, and the teachers would excuse them out. The devotion of love she was getting after she went missing was outstanding. But the thing is, no one liked Jessica. Actually, everyone hated her. Don't get me wrong, she was the most popular girl in school, but she was an asshole. She was very nasty and rude and did anything to get what she wanted. I heard she once gave this boy Ronnie peanuts for not doing her homework anymore. He wanted to get into sports and didn't have time for it, and he was allergic to peanuts. The girl was practically a bully. Her friends were all followers that secretly hated her but wanted to be her. But it's crazy to see them all crying over her whereabouts when they all wanted her gone. But I know why she went missing. Come back for part 2. Jessica going missing didn't faze me. Actually, the days felt lighter when she wasn't there. Yeah, she was the talk of the town for weeks, but I'd rather that than to actually see her. And I know some might say I'm heartless, but Jessica did it to herself. So the night of Nicole's birthday party is when it all started. Nicole and Jessica were like frenemies. I mean, they were friends, but they were always in competition with each other. I'd say Nicole was the second popular girl in school. She was the first, but she dropped to second because she lost her boyfriend Luke to Jessica. He cheated on her with Jessica. I can say that's when the war started. Anyways, the night of Nicole's party, Jessica wasn't invited. I remember overhearing her during lunch that she was going to plan to crash and ruin Nicole's party. Pretty devious if you ask me. So the night comes and I go to Nicole's party. An hour goes by and I take a step outside of the side of the house to get some fresh air. I see Jessica creeping from the back. I say, "Jessica, is that you?" She looks at me and before I know when someone grabs her face and pulls her into the bushes. So the night Jessica went missing, I saw exactly what happened. She tried to sneak into Nicole's party, but she actually didn't get in. Not only because she wasn't invited, but she had got pulled into the bushes. When I ran to see where she was pulled, she was dragged by 2 guys into the streets. I was in shock and I stood there for a few seconds, but those few seconds, Jessica saw me. She screamed for me to help her, but I just stood there. They threw her into a car and drove off. I went back to the party as though nothing happened. After the party was over, I went back home and I kept replaying what happened over and over. Then that next Wednesday is when everyone started hearing about Jessica going missing. They said if anyone ever saw anything to come forward, but I decided not to. There were moments throughout the week where I felt like I should say something, but there were times that I felt like it was too late. I thought maybe she was dead by now and it'd be pointless for me to come out now. But everything changed when I got a message from a block number saying, "Why didn't you say?" During Halloween, someone asked me if I ever had a paranormal experience, and I told them no because I was in disbelief of ghosts, and I was actually going through paranormal things at my house for years. I denied it to keep calm, but now that I moved, I feel comfortable enough to speak on the creepy things that went down.
So back in 1995, my dad had passed away, and my mom felt very uncomfortable being in our house, so we moved closer to family. I believe at the time I had to be 7, 8, and my brother was a teenager. The new house we moved in was very cold, not just physically, but in a sense emotionally cold. Well, that's how it felt to me. The floors cracked every time you walked, and the doors would make squeak noises. The first week, my brother would play around my door and scare me, but one night, in the middle of the night, I get a knock on my door. I ignored it thinking it was my brother, and then I heard another knock and it woke me up. I got up to tell my brother to leave me alone, but when I opened up the door, there was nobody there. Come back for part 2. Part 2 of my paranormal experience. So if you don't believe in unknown spirits, you can skip this. So like I said earlier, when I opened my door, nobody was there. I ran to my brother's room. He was asleep, so it was no way it was him. Next morning, I told my mom about it, and she assured me that ghosts weren't real. Anyways, a month later, weird things started happening to me. I started waking up in weird areas. The corner of my floor, the bathroom, and even my brother's room. He started to get weirded out and thought I was doing it on purpose, but I told him I didn't know how I got there. So that night, I begged him to stay in his room because I was scared. The next morning, I woke up to my brother staring at me. He said, "I think you sleepwalk, but you weren't really walking. You more so was dragging yourself. I saw you trying to leave the room. I called you and asked where you were going, but you weren't responding. And then you started floating in the air." I know this all sounds really crazy, but I'll explain it in part 3. Part 3 of my paranormal experience. So my brother told me that I was sleepwalking, and then I started floating in the air. My stomach dropped and I felt so scared. Then in the middle of me fearing my own body, my brother bust out laughing. I asked him, "What's funny?" He was like, "I was messing with you." And I moved towards him and pushed him for scaring me like that. He was like, "I had to. You were so scared." And then I laid back in the bed so relieved. But then he said, "You didn't float, but you definitely were sleepwalking. It explains why you wake up in my room." I was slightly confused because I've never walked in my sleep. Heck, I didn't even know sleepwalking was a real thing. I thought it was just something that they did in the movies. That day when my mom got back from work, I told her and she agreed to take me to the doctors one of these days. After a couple weeks, I completely stopped popping up in weird places, meaning I stopped sleepwalking. At least that's what I thought. I thought this whole paranormal thing was in my head until I had a near-death experience. But something saved me, and I'll explain it in part 4. Part 4 of my paranormal experience. A couple months later, when I started school, I started having dreams about my dad. It'd be him preparing me for school, home, making me lunch, helping me pick out clothes. But then I'd wake up from the dream and I realized that he wasn't actually there. It really saddened me, and it kept happening. I'd have that same dream over and over, and it went on for weeks. Then suddenly I had a dream that the house we used to live in caught on fire, but in this dream I could see myself, which felt weird. My dad had got up and started waking everyone up and telling them to go outside and leave. But when he got to me, I wasn't waking up. He kept shaking me to wake up. I'd think he'd pick me up to take me outside, but he was seriously just shaking me to wake up. He started crying, and I've never seen my dad cry, just telling me to please wake up. Then he screamed at me and said, "Wake up!" And the scream was so loud that it actually woke me out of my dream. When I opened my eyes, I must have been sleepwalking because I was one step away from falling down the stairs.